Thank you very much, Mr. President, and thanks to all of you for the opportunity to speak to you. I always approach with a sense of trepidation. I always feel the need to ask if I may approach the bench. I don't want to be tackled by security personnel if I make a misstep. Before we move further, I thought we should dispense with some opening business. I know that times are difficult for all Americans, and the Utah State government is no exception to that. And I understand that you, President Niederhauser, have a special skill when it comes to something known as a counter check. So I've got a counter check here. This will be made through Bear River State Bank. And I'm going to make this out to you personally, if that's okay. You'll handle it on behalf of the state of Utah. What would you like, $1 billion? 10 billion, maybe?
$5.
Wow, that's he tries a hard bargain. I'll take that as, see, in Washington, nobody would know what that meant, so I'll make it $5 billion.
Okay. Well, you can add another zero, and that'd be 5.
It's already written out, sorry about that. This way, you'll be able to get things done. There you go. This is very often how the spending feels in Washington. You know, we just decide what feels like a good amount, and then we authorize it. And it worked for us for a while, but it's getting more difficult. And the longer we wait before dealing with this, the more problems that more of us will face. So I'm very pleased to come and speak to you today. I take this obligation very seriously to report back to the Utah legislature every single year, to do so formally on days like today, and then less formally throughout the year. I hope each of you will feel comfortable calling the phone number that I've set aside for legislators to call anytime they've got questions or concerns. Everything I do in Washington is geared in one way or another toward essentially making you more powerful. We have accumulated power in Washington, D.C. over the last 80 years or so, to a point that I think it may have become counterproductive. Whether you are a liberal or a conservative, a Republican or a Democrat, most of you would probably acknowledge that the things that people want, the things your constituents need, can often best be provided at the state and the local level. It certainly is the case that they can't always be provided better by the federal government, and we've got to keep that in mind. I've distributed to you today for your reading enjoyment my annual written report to the legislature. I hope you'll enjoy this. It's captivating reading. It reads just like a Dan Brown novel, except for the absence of any discernible plot or really appealing characters. But other than that, it's fascinating. But I want to keep you apprised of what I'm doing back there to represent our state and its interests. As I approach what's happening in Washington, I often get worried about a culture that seems to be developing back there that involves a lot of finger pointing, a lot of people who are not wanting to take blame and who are always wanting to take credit for everything that's good and always assign blame to someone else if it's something bad. It reminds me of an experience I had while vacationing with my family through southern Utah a few years ago. We stopped through a Wendy's restaurant, and I went to the salad bar. I think I was trying to impress my wife that day to show her that I was eating healthy. And while at the salad bar, I noticed that they had chocolate pudding in the salad bar, and I couldn't resist the temptation to put pudding on my salad, even though it's really a bad combination. You mix ranch or blue cheese dressing with chocolate pudding, it's just not a good combination. There are certain things in nature that were not intended to go together, like bubble gum and peanuts, or toothpaste and orange juice. They just don't mix well. Well, there was another problem with this pudding at this Wendy's restaurant. It was sour. It was rancid. It had been sitting there for 2 or 3 days without being refrigerated. So immediately after I ate it, I thought, I've got to tell someone. I've got to tell someone who works here so that they can take care of the pudding and get rid of it. I went and found the closest Wendy's employee that I could find, and I said to her in kind of a hushed tone of voice, so as not to alarm the other customers, the pudding is bad. It's sour, it's rancid, you've got to do something about it. She looked at me with a blank stare for about 5 seconds, jaw sort of dropping, and then she said, "I'm not on salad," and then walked away. I couldn't quite figure out what to do with that. You know, I told her I didn't mean to suggest that you were on salad duty. I just thought you'd want to pass that along to whoever might be so they can take care of the problem. I don't know whether she did anything about it or not. But sometimes we have to assign ourselves to be on salad duty. There are those of us who, back in Washington, need to say, I am on our debt. I am on our $1 trillion annual deficit. I am on the problems associated with the porous border and an outdated immigration system that makes illegal immigration easy and legal immigration really, really difficult. I am on the problems associated with national defense and the massive draconian across-the-board cuts that are about to hit through sequestration. We have to, at least each and every one of us who are back there, be on these issues, regardless of which party we serve in or which House of Congress we're assigned to. I am confident that as Americans, we're up to the task. I think it was Winston Churchill who once famously said, the American people can always be counted upon to do the right thing, after, of course, they've exhausted every other alternative. And sometimes that is how it works back there. But difficult times bring people together. Sometimes they bring together unlikely bedfellows. In the last year, I've co-sponsored a couple of pieces of legislation with my friend Chuck Schumer, the senator from New York. He and I don't always agree on everything, but we do agree that there are certain things we can do to improve our immigration system, to make our visa system more effective, more efficient, and more responsive to changing economic circumstances. I've co-sponsored legislation with my friend Dianne Feinstein, the senator from California. She and I don't always agree on everything, but we do agree that American citizens ought to be protected when apprehended on U.S. soil against the risk of indefinite detention. That amendment that I ran with Dianne Feinstein as a freestanding bill in the form of the Due Process Guarantee Act made its way on to the National Defense Authorization Act of 2012. It was regrettably removed in the conference committee, but we're going to keep running it year after year until we can get it passed. There are lots of areas like these where we can work together. And I believe in the coming years we must work together, not only on these issues, but on a whole host of other expanding issues. Because what we're discovering is this, that whether you are a liberal or a conservative, whether you're a Democrat or a Republican, a program that you care about that's funded by the federal government is in jeopardy of facing sweeping, very uncomfortable cuts in the coming years unless we do something now to figure out how to pay for them. Let me just give you a little bit of a picture of where we're headed. We're paying right now, on average, about $220, $230 billion a year to service the national debt that we've accumulated. That's our annual interest payment. But according to the Congressional Budget Office and other economic analysts, we will, at some point in the coming years, some say maybe 3 or 4 years, others say more like 10 years, we will face an annual interest payment of $1 trillion every single year. Just the delta, the difference between what we're paying now in interest and what we'll be paying either 3 or 4 years from now, or maybe at the most a decade from now. About $800 billion is that difference. That difference is larger than our entire national defense budget. It's more money than what we spend on Social Security benefits in an entire year. It's about what we spend on Medicare and Medicaid combined through the federal government. That's what we'll have to cover. That in addition to our $1 trillion plus annual deficit. There is not a tax increase fathomable that can cover that. And if there were, it would promptly chill economic growth to the point that we would likely see less revenue rather than more coming in within a relatively short period of time. So this is creating, this kind of reality, which is setting in Washington, is creating unlikely bedfellows. It's creating unlikely alliances of people who are willing to come together and say, we've got to do something to get to the point where we balance our budget, to get to the point where we at least pass a budget. We're now going on 4 years since we've passed a budget in the United States Senate. That's a problem. The last time we had a budget enacted, there was no such thing as the iPad. That's part of how $16 trillion debts are created, and that's one of the reasons why we've got to pass one. So I look forward to tackling these and other issues, and I look forward to working with each of you as we try to figure out how we can maximize the effectiveness and the efficiency of government by right-sizing our national government and shifting back to you those things that probably belong in the state rather than the federal government. And with that, Mr. President, I open up. I'd be happy to answer any questions you may have.
I think we have time for a couple of questions. Senator Van Tassel.
Thank you very much. Senator, thank you for coming and for all that you do. It's my understanding that you've either should have just had or will have some hearings on compressed natural gas and exportation of that. I understand there's some opposition against that. Could you give us an update on that? We're starting to see in my area some slowdowns in the natural gas field with some layoffs. I think that's critical for our country as well as for my economy in the basin. So if you could, please.
I'd be happy to answer that, Senator Van Tassel. I sit on the Energy and Natural Resources Committee in the Senate, and we have a strong committee. We have a strong representation within that committee by a number of western states on both sides of the aisle, and that's been very helpful. We've got a new chairman in Ron Wyden from Oregon. Our ranking member is Lisa Murkowski from Alaska. Under the leadership of Chairman Wyden, we held a hearing just about a week ago on this very issue, on the idea of LNG exports. And there were two schools of thought represented within that room. One school of thought suggests let's not allow more than a very small amount of export of our natural gas product here in the United States because we need it here. We don't know what that will do to the price volatility of natural gas, and we're benefiting right now from very, very cheap, historically low prices for natural gas. And we don't want to throw that off by creating more demand from elsewhere, demand that we will have to compete with and then pay more. The other school of thought says, look, there's one thing that we know about free markets is that they adjust, they respond. And when there's more demand and when that starts to edge the price up, there will be more produced because more people will enter into the marketplace to produce and distribute that product. I am in the latter camp. I believe that we should allow the export, and it's not in spite of the fact that I like the currently low natural gas prices. It's because of that fact that I think we should allow export without significant restraints that are intended only to prevent export. And the reason is that the free market really does work. We had a number of witnesses there, and the most compelling witnesses that I found were those that identified this response, that you have to score this dynamically, meaning when you look at how a regulation might impact, you also have to look at the other side of it. You have to look at what will happen if we don't overregulate it, and the increased production that will bring about, and the natural price control that we'll have. I think we will all benefit as a country if we start allowing more production of our fuel resources, and natural gas is one that we have in greater abundance. So that's what I want to see happen. Now, Chairman Wyden feels torn. I've talked to him about it several times in the last couple weeks. He feels torn because he sees both sides. But I, along with others on the committee who believe in free markets, are working on them and trying to convince him that we're all better off when we allow the free market to operate.
Senator Hilliard.
Thank you. Glad to have you here, Senator.
Thank you,
my question goes to sequestration. As you know, that's currently scheduled for March 1st. We, contrary to Washington, do a balanced budget. We do it every year. We have those challenges of doing that. And the question always comes up, how will the sequestration impact the state of Utah? I was worried until I heard the other day they said it's going to be $4 trillion of cuts over a 10-year period, which if I took that correct, that's like $400 billion a year. That's less than half of the deficits we're running every year that we continue to run. Could you give me some idea where these sequestration cuts will hit in Utah, and assuming that nobody kicks the can down the road on March 1st?
Yes, I'm happy to address that. First of all, one of the few pieces of good news I can give you is that we're not talking about $4 trillion. We're talking about the total amount required by the Budget Control Act of 2011 is right around $1 trillion. So not $4 trillion, but about $1 trillion stretched over that 10-year period. So it isn't quite as bad as what you've described. The Budget Control Act of 2011 was set up in such a way as to require these cuts to be made within each program. I don't know what the term, the precise term is that describes it, but it's program by program, so it requires across-the-board cuts. They are not at liberty statutorily within the Pentagon to decide just to cut programs A, B, and C, but leave all other programs intact. They have to make cuts within each area. There have been discussions about the idea of loosening some of that discretion, providing more discretion in the Pentagon so that they can make adjustments as they deem fit. There are some areas within our national defense where there really isn't any fat to cut at all, and where the results would be somewhat catastrophic if they had to cut right away. So even though I think sequestration is likely to take effect next week, which is regrettable, I voted against the Budget Control Act of 2011 in part because of this. I foresaw, number one, that the supercommittee would fail, and it did. And number two, that if you're going to bring about cuts this large, they need to be made more broadly on a more balanced basis and not in a way that cuts disproportionately into national defense. I ran at least 2 pieces of legislation last year that would have replaced sequestration, would have made sequestration unnecessary while helping to bring us to balance in a roughly 5-year period. The House of Representatives also came up with several alternative proposals that were not acted upon in the last Congress. We need the President to come forward and tell us what his proposal is. We've offered a number of them from our side of the aisle, both from the House side and the Senate side. We need to hear what the President's plan is. One of the really unfortunate aspects of it is we don't know exactly what impact it's going to have because for reasons that still astound me, the Pentagon has not come up with detailed plans of how it will implement sequestration in the event that it kicks in full force. I find this stunning. I'm a new member of the Senate Armed Services Committee, and we had the chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff in front of our committee recently, and I asked them this question. I'm waiting for some answers still in writing in response to my questions about why it is that this law has been on the books now for over a year and a half, and they haven't come up with any detailed plans as to how they're going to implement it. But needless to say, this is a matter that's at the top of our discussion list, and it will continue to be for some time.
Thank you, Senator Lee. We appreciate you coming here today, and especially appreciate the report that may not have a plot, but I think it's great that you're reporting back to us as a legislature and the people of the state of Utah. Thank you.
Thank you. Thanks to all of you.